Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the Matrix. Magic pixie dust is being sprinkled all over this presidential election. The sorcerer known as Barack Obama has been conjuring up Hollyweird spells in a desperate attempt to save Kamala Harris's campaign. Democrats just can't seem to comprehend that celebrities do not have the same impact they once had. They're not relatable anymore, especially when you have people struggling financially. You think American citizens want to hear some rich wacko rapper tell them about politics and who they should vote for? Hey, you guys, I know things are tough for you right now. Gas prices are through the roof, your grocery budget has taken a major hit, and maybe you're struggling to pay your bills. But let me tell you, if you vote for Vice President Kamala Harris, she will help the American people out of this crisis. Unlike that loud-mouthed narcissist who only cares about himself. Yo, Eminem. That vice president is partly responsible for the crisis. What makes you think she'd do anything different as president? Huh? Why should we vote for her when she can't even explain any of her policies? Come on, man, I like your music, but, you're an idiot. Kamala Harris is using Hollyweird to motivate the voters, but this is an insult. Now, here's the thing. The citizens that are jumping around and cheering in these rallies are actually struggling as a result of this administration's failed policies. Yet they are so dysfunctional. Their financial hardships are secondary, as their primary motivation is to simply oppose the political opposition. They should all starve and lose their homes out of just being complete morons. Anywho, once again, Harris falls on her face. This has to be some sort of record by now. Interview after interview, town hall after town hall, Harris just keeps getting worse. You'd think she would have improved with every go-around. But in a weird case of irony, she is actually performing worse. In a town hall hosted by CNN, Harris continues to provide evidence that she has conceded defeat, but is going out guns a-blazing. It's not working, as you're out of ammunition. The Hill reports, quote, Vice President Harris largely stuck to her talking points during a CNN town hall moderated by Anderson Cooper on Wednesday, fielding questions from voters in the crucial state of Pennsylvania. Harris also answered questions from Cooper on a variety of topics, including the economy, immigration, the war in the Middle East, as well as assessments of former President Trump. The vice president stayed on script for much of the forum in Delaware County, but also tackled personal topics, including grief, her faith, and mistakes in her life and professional career. Oh, really? Maybe she should have mentioned the mistakes this administration made, right? Nah, that's too honest. She agreed to the town hall after the prospect of another debate against Trump appeared unlikely. The Republican presidential candidate opted not to participate in the town hall, which CNN also invited him to. Here are 4 takeaways from the night. Harris overly relies on stump speech. Harris largely relied on her typical talking points during interviews and stump speeches when it came to the Israel war in Gaza, immigration, the economy, how she would lead differently than President Biden, and other issues, keeping her answers safe, and avoiding making news when asked by voters on hot-button topics. On immigration, Cooper questioned if she felt the Biden administration should have issued an executive order sooner to limit asylum at the U.S. southern border in order to curb the influx of migrants. Quote, I think we did the right thing. The best thing would be bipartisan work on immigration reform from Congress, unquote. Now, she doesn't answer the question, as always, and to be honest, there's no need to even ask Harris questions about anything political. Just have her run around with Hollyweird celebrities in her rallies. Let that be her final stretch of activity in her campaign, because she isn't going to hold herself accountable. She won't acknowledge the failures of this administration, and she won't elaborate on any of the proposed policies. So what's the point of more interviews, town halls, or a debate? Just let her fade away, enjoying entertainment with the Hollyweird celebrities. The vice president then reverted to blaming Trump for his hand in ending a negotiation among bipartisan senators earlier this year when pressed on immigration, avoiding throughout her campaign on commenting on if Biden should have acted unilaterally earlier. She was later asked by a voter about what she would do to ensure that not another Palestinian dies due to bombs being funded by U.S. tax dollars. The vice president turned to her typical talking points again by calling for the war to end and for security for Palestinians and the Israelis. Quote, far too many innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. It's unconscionable. There is a current opportunity to end the war and bring the hostages held by Hamas home, given the recent killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. The Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza has led to protests from pro-Palestinian Americans, raising concerns among Democrats about whether anger on the issue will hurt Democrat support among Arab and Muslim Americans, as well as young voters. Briefly, let's just keep reiterating. It's pointless to even ask Harris about foreign relations, as she skipped a congressional speech from the Prime Minister of Israel. Not only did it show horrible leadership in her presidential campaign, it also showed the Prime Minister that Harris, who was the presidential candidate at that time, does not stand with Israel. Of course, it's not so simple, but Harris would obviously have to negotiate with the Prime Minister at some point as president. So skipping his congressional speech indicated she indirectly sides with Palestine. That's not a good look from the United States' relationship with Israel. Anyway, Harris agrees Trump is a fascist. Harris agreed that she believes Trump is a fascist, but again avoided using that word to label her political rival directly. When Cooper asked her, "Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?" noting that she had not outright said that word to describe him, she responded, quote, "Yes, I do," unquote. So here's the problem. These claims are not resonating with the American people. Trump, on the other hand, is proving that Harris is incompetent based on her inability to articulate her message. She is a Marxist based on her policy proposals, was responsible for the border crisis based on her being the border czar, and is a threat to democracy based on all of the above. His claims are backed with facts by her own record and her own statements. Fascism is just thrown out there because of the personality of Trump, that being authoritative in nature, as he was a former businessman. So they can manipulate with that persona, but the claim isn't backed by any evidence, even in his prior administration. Let's continue. When asked later about her pro-Israel stance and what she would say to voters who are thinking about supporting a third-party candidate because of the Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza, she alluded to Trump being fascist. Quote, "For many people who care about this issue, they also care about bringing down the price of groceries, who also care about our democracy, and not having a president of the United States who admires dictators and is a fascist." Cooper also asked Harris if she believes Trump is anti-Semitic, and she would not agree, instead calling him dangerous and a danger to the well-being and security of America. John Kelly, Trump's ex-White House chief of staff, said the 45th president certainly falls into the general definition of fascist in an interview in the New York Times this week, prompting a conversation about whether Trump should be labeled as such. Okay, Democrats seem to believe that a Republican coming out and criticizing Trump or a former staffer somehow justifies their claims against him. It doesn't prove anything, because if it were so, there would be more Republicans coming out disavowing him. And if they claim those Republicans are also fascist, then reference policy. Republicans in general are for smaller government, while Democrats in general are for bigger government. If you look at policies and ideologies, Democrats are actually the fascist, as they enforce authoritative rule over citizens. If you are a parent who doesn't approve of gender-affirming care for your children, a Democratic governor signs an executive order to allow the government to gain custody of your children, taking your child from you and the family. This is what Tim Walz, Harris's running mate, signed into Minnesota state law. That is dictatorship in real life. Or what about how Democrats are compliant with the distribution of child pornography in school libraries? This is a form of indoctrination, control, sexualization of young children and minors, and the local and state government does absolutely nothing about it, because it's a form of fascism as well, a perverted form of it. Quote, Harris gets personal on religion and faith. The vice president took the opportunity to present a more personal side of herself to voters when she was asked about her faith and how she handles grief. Quote, "I was raised to believe in a loving God, to believe that your faith is a verb. You live your life, your work, and your life's work should be to think about how you can serve in a way that is uplifting other people. That guides a lot about how I think about my work," unquote. Now, not sure how she's going to wiggle her way out of this jam. Kamala Harris, this same person talking about her faith and all, supported the state of California suing a Catholic hospital for rejecting a woman's request for an abortion. Explains another reason why she didn't attend the Al Smith annual dinner. Those Catholics would give her the evil eye all throughout that roasting. But she's just blabbering to sound relatable. Meanwhile, her proposals contradict everything she says going forward. She recalled her conversation with her pastor, the day Biden dropped out of the 2024 race and endorsed her, saying she needed a prayer in that moment. She added that she prays every day, and sometimes twice a day. For what? What are you praying for exactly? Nonsense. Harris, who frequently invokes her late mother, also addressed how she approaches grief in response to a question from a woman who lost her husband a year ago. Harris addresses her weaknesses and mistakes. Harris admitted she has made many mistakes when asked by Cooper to identify one from her past. Harris said she was certainly not perfect, but went on to identify what she said was a strength. Quote, I may not be quick to have the answer as soon as you ask it about a specific policy issue sometimes, because I'm going to want to research it. I'm going to want to study it. I'm kind of a nerd sometimes, I confess, and some might call that a weakness, especially if you're in an interview. Unquote. Did I just read what I think I read? Did the Vice President of the United States, running for President of the United States, just say what I think she said? You may not be quick to have the answer as soon as someone asks about a specific policy. Isn't your policies they're asking you about? What policies do you not have a firm grasp of that you need to research about? Let's see here. You have the economy, immigration, border policies, foreign relations, education, crime, law enforcement, women's rights, abortion. I mean, what have you been doing as vice president, if not making sure you are at least knowledgeable about these major issues? Crime and law enforcement. We assume you have a lot of experience there, right? You were just the border czar, should have a firm understanding of immigration. Education. You should have a fundamental understanding of that as well. Women's rights, we already know that's something you're quite knowledgeable about. Foreign relations, well, it doesn't help that you skipped a congressional speech from one of your allies, but I'm sure you have some knowledge of that. Anyway, the point is, how are you asking the voters to elect you as president when you're literally telling them that you can't immediately answer a question about policies? What the hell is this? And let's be honest, every question a voter would ask Harris is in fact a fundamental policy question. It is not, I repeat, it is not something so complex that she has to consult with advisors about. It's just, I'm done.
Wow, this is humiliating. A presidential candidate tells voters she has to research about policy issues? If you're not sure about policies, and we have to point out that the policy concerns from those voters are in fact associated with Harris's proposals, how do you expect to convince voters to support you when you appear just as uninformed about your policy proposals as they are? This is flat out astonishing. I mean, let's be clear here. Harris is actually admitting she has no idea what she's doing in her own presidential campaign. Her campaign staff apparently are the ones drafting her policies. And since they are obviously wacky progressives, it's a train wreck of a campaign. Some would give her the benefit of the doubt in saying, oh, she was thrown into the fire prematurely as old Joe stepped down. At face value, you can give her that benefit of the doubt. But as you start to dissect that narrative, we see that Harris does in fact have a list of policies on her website, meaning everything proposed has been drafted, evaluated, and finalized. So what policy is Harris struggling with, to where she has to research about it? Furthermore, if she hasn't been an effective border czar in almost 4 years now, what exactly has she been doing all this time? It's unacceptable. Let's continue. Quote, if you've ever parented a child, you know you've made lots of mistakes. In my role as vice president, I think I've probably worked very hard at making sure, okay, let's stop. This is a bunch of blabbering, and it's a bit agitating. We can suggest that the question about her weaknesses and mistakes is referencing her role as vice president. Yet, it wasn't framed that way, you see. Just admit the mistakes this administration made, including your role as vice president, and propose to do better as president. Just spill the beans and get it over with. The American people already know this, so why not just accept it, admit it, and move on? Anywho, I think I've probably worked very hard at making sure that I am well-versed on issues, and I think that is very important. I think it's a mistake not to be well-versed on an issue and be compelled to answer a question. Unquote. Literally, a bowl of salad. Harris was originally asked by a voter about which weaknesses she brings to the table and how she plans to overcome them in office. Okay, that's enough. This town hall is just another example of an individual not qualified to run for president. Instead of running around partying with Hollywood celebrities and donors pumping her campaign up with millions of dollars, once she became the Democratic nominee, Harris should have been in Situation Room, surrounded by a group of economists, environmentalists, foreign relations advisors, education czar, and other advisors, helping her draft her policy proposals. Instead, Harris enjoyed the spotlight for several months, not realizing the more she partied, the more devastating it would be when it was time to talk policies. You see, of course a candidate will hold rallies, raise money and all, but she was not the typical presidential nominee. She was prematurely selected, therefore. Harris wasn't supposed to carry out her presidential campaign the traditional way. Trump was already nominated, so it didn't apply to him. Also, he already has a foundation of policies, being a former president. Kamala Harris, at the time of being vice president, was abruptly thrown in as a replacement for old Joe. So obviously you need to treat the campaign differently, due to the circumstances. But no, she treated it like a normal campaign, and when those interviews started popping up, she hadn't thoroughly evaluated her policies, didn't take the time to sift through the pros and cons, and appeared lost and confused about her own policies. Now here's perhaps the major problem. The policies are actually a copy and paste of old Joe's policies. As she has struggled to articulate the policies, this would indicate, as vice president, she wasn't paying attention, or better yet, Harris wasn't concerned about policies in the administration. And like a boomerang with sharp blades at the tips, those same policies have come back around, like being quizzed on the spot, and Harris has no clue about them. Kamala Harris was partying too much, and when her college exams rolled around, she was not prepared. Trump, on the other hand, had already prepared for the exams and is able to party at McDonald's. To some degree, Harris does have a reasonable explanation, sure, but that's based on her overall campaign and the short time frame of preparing. We can give her that, but as vice president and the failures of the administration, she can't avoid that. Also, she isn't insignificant as vice president, so her knowledge of the economy, foreign relations, global affairs, and the like should be something Harris should have been able to explain. But if she wasn't taking the job seriously from the start, well, this is the result. A presidential candidate who looks more and more confused with every interview. Let's move on. Obama just won't give up, I see. He's in it for the long haul. Well, he has no choice. He can't neglect Harris at this point. The wizard tries to perform magic in Detroit by bringing another Hollyweird celebrity to entertain the crowd.
They're not really grasping how pathetic this is. The American people are not interested in this circus act. Those blue states may jump up and down, cheering on Eminem. But obviously these rally goers are paid voters for the Harris Walls ticket. Then again, maybe they're just as insane as the people they cheer for, such as Eminem. Quote, rapper Eminem and Obama rally voters for Kamala Harris in Detroit. Detroit rapper Eminem stepped into the political arena Tuesday in his hometown, where he spoke at a rally for Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, before welcoming former President Barack Obama to the stage. Quote, as most of you know, the city of Detroit and the whole state of Michigan mean a lot to me. And going into this election, the spotlight is on us more than ever. Eminem, a longtime critic of former President Donald Trump, told the crowd. And I think it's important to use your voice. So I'm encouraging everybody to get out and vote. Unquote. Who is Eminem actually talking to here? Because those rally goers are already voting for Harris, right? If they're undecided voters, then they're not voting. You see, this claim that there are undecided voters is a sham. The only way there are undecided voters is if both candidates are evenly matched and the voter is having a hard time making that decision. This is not one of those hard decisions. Meaning, everyone on the left is voting for Harris because they despise Republicans. Independents who lean to the left may be a bit conflicted, but let's be honest. They would rather sit out if they don't approve of Trump. Then you have those on the right who are definitely not voting for Harris. Might sit out or they're voting for Trump. The point, both candidates have offered their propositions to the American people. Both have been in office, and the American citizens already have comparative studies of both administrations. Just because Kamala Harris is the vice president does not mean she isn't held accountable for this administration's failed policies. She hasn't proposed anything beneficial, claims she wouldn't do anything different than old Joe. So if she is claiming this, yet simultaneously claiming she represents a new generation of leadership, what in the hell does this translate to exactly? You guessed it, a word salad, and so-called undecided voters definitely do not appeal to a candidate who is talking in circles. So it's all to give the illusion there are voters out there to pick up for Harris, when whoever is going to vote for her has already been accounted for. Unless we factor in a bit of last-minute financial persuasion, if you catch my drift. Let's continue. He said that people shouldn't be afraid of retribution or making their opinion known. Harris supports a future for this country, where these freedoms and many others will be protected and upheld. Unquote. All gaslighting nonsense. Retribution? What Kamala Harris' potential voter would experience retribution for that support. Is he alluding to black and Hispanic men? Seems so. But of course, he would be speaking out of place, telling black and Hispanic men to vote for Harris. Voter turnout in Detroit, a longtime Democratic stronghold, will be crucial in determining who wins the state in November. Michigan is among a handful of swing states expected to determine who wins the presidency, as well as control of the U.S. Senate. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin, who faces Republican Mike Rogers for an open Senate seat, appeared alongside Obama at the rally. Obama attacked Trump as unfit, citing recent incidents such as a town hall, where Trump opted to hold an impromptu concert of sorts, swaying back and forth to various songs for about 40 minutes, rather than taking questions from voters. Really? You're criticizing Trump for this? When your candidate hasn't completed a coherent response to most of her interview questions. Insanity. Quote, if your grandpa was acting like this, you'd be worried. This is somebody who wants unchecked power. We do not need to see what an older, loonier Donald Trump looks like with no guardrails. America is ready to turn the page. Turn the page from the very administration that the Democratic presidential candidate was a part of? If you're suggesting that somehow you're turning the page of a Trump era in politics, you do realize that it makes you small. It makes you look insignificant. It makes you look lesser of a party. To suggest that Trump has had such an impact in politics that there has been a collective mob of Democrats plotting and scheming to, quote, turn the page from a Trump era in politics. In addition, since Kamala Harris claimed there was nothing different she would do as president from this current administration, this means she has nothing different to propose to the American people. So turning the page, moving forward with so-called new leadership, lands right back to this administration's views, ideologies, and policies. Nonsense. Trump has made his own bid for Detroit, appearing with hometown rapper Trick Trick at a rally in the city last week. Trick Trick previously collaborated with Eminem on the track Welcome to Detroit. Obama and other speakers Tuesday, which included many top Democratic leaders in the state, capitalized on comments Trump made in Detroit earlier this month when he said it was a developing city. Quote, the whole country will be like, you want to know the truth? It'll be like Detroit, unquote. Trump said as he addressed the Detroit Economic Club, our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president. Now, briefly, that was a bad move by Trump. But in all fairness, he was in Detroit discussing economics, and Detroit has become a very impoverished city due to lack of auto industry manufacturing and Democratic mayors who have also destroyed the city. So in context, he's right, but not politically correct. Michigan Governor Kathy Bates, or Gretchen Whitmer, who spoke in the lead up to Eminem and Obama, snapped back Tuesday. Quote, I know you all saw what he said about this beautiful city. He called Detroit a failure and a mess, proving he ain't firing on all cylinders. He doesn't have a clue what the hell he was talking about. And you know what I think? He ought to keep Detroit out of his mouth. Unquote. Of course, Wacky Whitmer just can't resist being the center of attention. She knows the city is a failure and a mess. Everyone knows it, including residents of Detroit. Whitmer looks away when dealing with Detroit, and it's mainly due to the, quote, cultural stronghold in that city. Democrats like to hide their failures, and when someone like Trump with the megaphone speaks out about it, they execute damage control to shut him up. Many residents of Detroit agree with Trump, and although he made that statement, he is also promising to improve those conditions. You see, mature adults understand where he's coming from, and they accept the harsh criticism and hope something can be done about it. Mind you, under a Democratic mayor leadership of that city, nothing gets done. For instance, a former mayor of Detroit, Kwame Kilpatrick, was convicted of corruption and sent to federal prison for 28 years. He was recently released after serving 7 years of that sentence. Building inspectors have been indicted on federal felony bribery charges, and a former city council member was investigated in a bribery and kickback scandal. One summarized it pretty well. Quote, when Democrats are in control, cities tend to go soft on crime, reward cronies with public funds, establish hostile business environments, heavily tax the most productive citizens, and set up fat pensions for their union friends. Simply put, theirs is a blue state blueprint for disaster. Unquote. And that's the most accurate summary of many Democrat-run cities. Corruption supersedes production, and that's why there are run-down schools, tons of abandoned buildings, businesses going bankrupt, due to high rates of unemployment in the communities, which they can't make consistent revenue from, and criminals are essentially free to run around untamed in the communities. So, of course, cities like Detroit are in fact failures, with the lack of leadership overseeing it. And Eminem hasn't done anything for the city he calls home. How about opening a music school? How about working with the mayor of the city to hold annual contests of creativity, where residents can display their talents and compete for scholarships, record deals, or other business ventures that can help bring back Detroit's economy? Great idea, right? But once again, Hollywood celebrities are so far detached from the common person, these ideas rarely cross their mind. But Eminem is such a brilliant mind, right? Well, prove it. In conclusion, there is nothing Eminem, Obama, or any other individual can do to help Kamala Harris. She's a lame duck, just waiting to be kicked out of office. In about a week or so, the eviction notice will be put on her door. Too late to try and convince the American people you'll pay the rent. You had almost 4 years to do it. This is the Chaos Sector.